I think you've very eloquently described some of the problems that we're facing, and we're going to certainly get into those, and also the need for this to happen, because what we're seeing right now is it's kind of this transition point. We're in this interesting bardo where we're somewhere still riding on some constructs and systems that used to work in the old times under different circumstances and situations, and are starting to fail and starting to collapse. And the way that everything is working now is somewhat urgent, I think to say, is and that might even be a euphemism. So let's start getting into this and start talking about the potential solutions. And one of the things that you mentioned was the importance of the epistemic commons. And the epistemic commons, epistemic meaning pertaining to knowledge, commons meaning available to everybody. The places where we are able to access knowledge are now being it. This is now, I think you referred to it as the hyper battlefield right now of non-kinetic warfare. Everybody is using the commons as a way to manipulate people, to actually change information. It's become something that no longer is trusted, and for good reason. So let's talk about that. Let's go into, first of all, the importance of the epistemic commons, and then what is happening to the epistemic commons.
Yeah, there's actually quite a few things that you said there. So when you were talking about the battlefield of non-kinetic warfare, just to clarify, for some people, if the term isn't obvious, kinetic warfare means bullets and bombs and physical warfare. Von Clausewitz said, war is politics by other means. And so you can say that everything other than kinetic warfare is politics, meaning it is a battle between the interests of various groups. But you can also start to recognize that when those groups identify each other as rivals fundamentally, and will use whatever kind of capacity they have to make a win over their rival, that it's just non-kinetic warfare. So that we can think of economic warfare when you're trying to corner the market on the thing, you're trying to, sanctions and whatever. You can
Trade
think of
embargoes, yeah.
You can think of diplomatic and political warfare. You can think about narrative and information warfare. How do we control the narrative so more people vote for our side or believe in our country and its patriotic purpose or whatever it is, or our religion and advance a holy war? Is not a new thing, right? Narrative warfare is a very old thing. Sun Tzu talks about it. The 36 stratagems in ancient Chinese military theory are basically all about it. But the modern age gives us narrative warfare capacities via the web and social media that are really radically unheard of. So we would actually say that the most fundamental warfare occurring is economic. It's backed up by the possibility of kinetic warfare, but the front where most of the activity is happening is cultural war, narrative war, info war. If you control what people believe is true, then they will think that they are self-governing, and you affect what they believe about what is meaningful. They will think that they are freely self-governing towards a purpose that happens to be a purpose that other people helped to engineer. And so
let me challenge something that you said real quick. You said that the fundamental warfare that we're experiencing is economic warfare, which to my mind, and just to clarify, that would mean like US versus, China in this kind of grappling with what the world economy is actually, where the balances are shifted and scaled. To me, it seems like that would mean that there was a coherent United States I think there may actually be a coherent China, but that's because they have a different regime. But that would imply that there's a coherent United States that actually cares about something other than their own political career. And I'm not convinced that there is any actual cohesion between the United States actually giving a shit about anything other than individuals giving shit about themselves at the time that we're in right now.
So who is the actual actor in warfare is a very good question. Right? Is the US a coordinated and coherent monolithic actor, or are individual people in positions of lobbying power, legislative power, political power, making decisions that largely have to do with CYA, cover your ass kind of stuff for themselves, and ladder climbing and bonus structures and whatever, and kind of actually debasing the integrity of the commons, in this case, the country? Are they making party wins that hurt the country as a whole? even if it like, let's increase the narrative rhetoric about how bad the other party is so we make a win, even though we're driving countrymen against each other so much that the country actually loses its coherence and ability to do anything in the presence of other geopolitical powers rising very rapidly who don't have that issue.
That's what I see.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a school of libertarian thought called public choice theory that gives a very good critique of the idea of representative democracy. And it's not offering a good solution, but we just have to know the critique, which is the representative in a position of government is still an individual economic actor themselves. And especially if they have term limits, they're going to get out and do something else afterwards. And especially because there's the position of being a representative, it has limited economic return, but they're regulating industries that have huge economic potential. And they're supposed to largely regulate in a way that decreases some of the economic possibilities that would otherwise be predatory, right? You know, you're not going to dump that pollution there. You have to process it in a more expensive way or whatever it is. And so and kind of no matter what the representative does, half of everybody won't like them and almost nobody will know what they really did when you have a system that becomes this opaque and complicated. So whether they fuck the whole and virtue signal or really authentically serve the people, they'll be kind of equally liked and disliked most of the time. And nobody will really be able to see the accounting. And so how do you actually bind their interests to being a representative of the whole rather than a representative of their own self-interest so that they check the market rather than the market capture the regulatory process that's supposed to check it? The fundamental idea in a liberal democracy is, okay, we're not going to try to have the state run everything the way that a communist structure might. We're going to let the market run things because all the ideas of why we like markets. It's a decentralized system and the supply and demand is kind of a collective intelligence. When there's more desire for something, the demand goes up, which creates a basis for supply to occur emergently. And then the rational actors will choose the best product or service at the best price, like all of that kind of market theory. So we'll let the market do that thing. And it has less total impositional force than a state trying to do it. But we don't do laissez-faire pure market with no state because there will be a market for really bad things. Like we can have a market for organ harvesting and we can have a market for sex trade and whatever kinds of things. And it could be profitable to cut down all the trees and there's no national forest left or kill all the fish or whatever it is. So a lot of law, organized crime, whatever, right? A lot, but it wouldn't be crime. There would be no force checking it other than competing organized crimes. So the idea.
Well, I mean, you could presumably have, law, but with radical economic libertarianism, right? Like you can't hurt other people, the environment being the indirect way to hurt other people. So I suppose if you are making a libertarian, I don't think you're saying that, that there isn't an argument for a different type of libertarian belief in which you protect the commons that are the earth, not the epistemic commons, but the actual logistical, physical commons of our shared mother. And you also protect each other, but also leave everything completely laissez-faire. And I don't know, I'm not advocating that.
When you mention law, the topic of enforcement comes up. So who is the you that could do the thing? And if the enforcement doesn't have asymmetric capacity to those who are violating it, it breaks. So rule of law is based on the concept of a monopoly of violence. And the military force and the police force are the idea of who is a safe holder of a monopoly of violence to be able to institute rule of law. So here, I'm not saying that it's accurate, but the kind of foundational idea, and it's accurate enough that it's worth understanding, the foundational idea of why a liberal democracy of this kind is the market on its own will do some things really well, but some predatory stuff. So you want something to check it. But the thing that checks it has to be more powerful than it or it doesn't work.
Right.
And but then the question is, what is checking it? Right. And so in a market, let's say that we even started out T equals 0, everybody has the exact same amount of money. It would never happen that way, but let's pretend that we did. Pretty soon, you'd have a power law distribution of wealth. It just always ends up occurring that way because some people get ahead better because of better capacities, luck, whatever it is. And then those increased financial capacities make it easier to make more money. You make interest on interest, you gain interest on debt, that kind of thing.
So principle takes over and it gets even more exacerbated.
So when you get a power law distribution of wealth, how do you have anything like representation or justice for these people when these people can put everybody in their employment and like that? Well, the idea is you need something even more powerful than the top of the market, and that's the state. And so we're going to give it monopoly of violence, but it has to be representing the people as a whole. So the commons, the collective, everybody is going to be. So this is why we want a government of, for, and by the people. And that the basis of law, which is the only thing that monopoly of violence will back up, is the collective ethics of the people, right? The values of the people that get to come through some kind of discussion and voting process turn into the basis, are the jurisprudence basis of law itself. The key thing is that the purpose of the state is to check the predatory aspects of the market while leaving the healthy aspects of the market. Mm-hmm. But that only works if the people check the state. Mm-hmm. Right. And when you look at the structure of the Constitution, it was largely around how do we make sure that the state doesn't become a runaway thing and that the people actually check it, while giving it enough power that it checks the otherwise predatory aspects of market that would make feudalism again. Because if you don't have a state and you have a power law distribution of wealth, you end up getting something like feudalism. And so this is why George Washington famously said, I'm going to paraphrase, but the number one aim of the federal government is the comprehensive education of every single citizen in the science of government. And it's so huge, right? That was the founding idea, that he was saying that, because he didn't say the number one aim is to institute rule of law. And he didn't say it's to protect the borders, right? Or monetary creation. Because if the number one aim is to protect the borders, it can become a military dictatorship very effectively.
Sure.
If the number one aim is to institute rule of law, it can become an oppressive dictatorship very easily, a police state. The only way it stays a democracy of, for, and by the people is if the number one goal is the comprehensive education of everyone in science of government, was the term of art at the time. What are the principles about how humans coordinate with each other that everyone would need to know to intelligently participate in their own sovereign self-governance? So they have to understand history and political theory and game theory and coordination theory and all those kinds of things. Now, you can see that most people don't have any sense in the US today that they are part of government at all. They will complain about government as if it's something out there, but if you don't participate actively in your own governance, you are de facto consenting to be ruled, right, by whoever it is that does show up to do that thing. So this is where the epistemic commons comes in, right? That was a quote about that the number one aim of the federal government has to be to support the integrity of the epistemic commons, the process by which everyone comes to understand things. So specifically, education and the fourth estate, the education by which people could learn how to think, could have enough basis in the understanding of how economic motives work and how coordination works and those types of things, where they don't come up with dumb propositions that have already been tried and figured out because they just didn't understand it, how rule of law works. That education has to be foundational. And the fourth estate is, what is the information about what's happening today that we're going to need to make choices on in an unbiased or bias corrected way, that the people have both the current information and the ability to process the information so that they can participate in deciding what are the right propositions and crafting propositions. Before the lobbyists, the idea was the people would actually craft the proposition in a town hall talking to each other, right? And so it's the education and the fourth estate are prerequisite institutions for democracy to work, or anything like a republic or an open society to work. If those erode, then you could not possibly have people participating in collective effective governance because they don't know how to think about the issues. If we ask average people in the US today about almost any of the issues that government is having to govern on, from a DOE policy on microgrid stability for the electrical grid, or nuclear first strike policy if an issue came with another nuclear country or whatever, like, I've never even thought about those fucking things. I don't know.
And we're too busy worrying about, gay rights in some country where someone's arguing about it, or some other kind of red herring that is being thrown out that triggers some tribal or kind of gut reaction response, instead of talking about the actual real serious challenges that are being faced. And that's, certainly just one of the many aspects that you're mentioning, is that the things that we're debating are actually, in large case, a lot of things that are not the things that are actually the boot that is, with the soul on our throat. You know what I mean?
You mentioned, okay, so now we're going to come back to the economic warfare thing. And when you say gay rights as a subset of the different types of highly polarizing issues and identity politic type issues are a great way to have a population largely stay divided against each other and not notice the macro structures that are most problematic, particularly things associated. Okay, I'm going to share a construction here. A poor white person and a poor black person have more in common with the possibility space of their life than either of them have in common with a billionaire. And they have differences, like important differences, and depending upon where they live, more significant so. And so one could start to say, well, all of our lives would get better if we had better economic, like fundamentally, we had better access to resources. If our kids went to better schools, we had better healthcare. These are economic issues. We're working 2 jobs or whatever it is to barely pay for a crappy house, can't spend time with our kids, so we can't parent well. Like, these are economic issues. And then there are some people who, at the top of the power law distribution, own almost all the wealth. That if that was differently allocated, it would create a very different quality of life for everybody. The degree to which races continue to stay focused against each other, or LGBTQ against cis, hetero, whatever, or partisanship, left versus right, is the degree to which they don't recognize that they have some deeper commonalities that have deeper structural drivers that would require some kind of unity to actually address. So that is a classic trap. That's a classic narrative warfare trap. What is it? And this is not just by those in the top economic class within the country. Also, if I'm another country that wants to not have the US be dominant for, say, real reasons, because they're doing geopolitical bullying or whatever, or because we actually want to win the geopolitical great game of power, I'm not going to take the US on head on, the biggest military in the world. I'm not going to do an attack that doesn't have plausible deniability. But if I can find existing fault lines in the system where people are sensitive to be turned against each other, and I can just poke on that, where the people turn against each other more, how you turn the larger enemy against itself is a classic military strategy for dealing with a larger opponent. So now fucking Facebook does it on its own without even having that intention. It's not that Facebook has a conspiratorial intention or political intention. It made the people who wanted QAnon stuff get more of that, and the people who wanted Antifa stuff get more of that, based on the algorithm that was optimizing time on site.
And that algorithm, you mentioned the strength of that algorithm. I mean, you told a story where, Gary Kasparov lost to Deep Blue, which is the chess algorithm, and that beat a chess grandmaster, and he knew he was facing off against a computer. Well, the algorithms that are running social media are more advanced than the algorithm that beat Gary Kasparov, and we don't even really know that we're squaring up against him. I mean, exactly. that just is a mind-blowing example of what we're actually dealing with. And I think the people there, they're just letting it run, based on it's getting more attention equals more ads served equals more money. And it's just, the thing is just running, and it's kind of running out of control at whatever cost, by whatever means necessary.
So most people, their time on site doesn't get maximized by showing them complex, nuanced arguments. They bounce, right? They get to an article and there's a complex, nuanced argument, they bounce. If there's a clickbaity title, they're more likely to click on it. So there is a actual incentive for salaciousness. And then if it's short enough, if it's put into a soundbite or a tweet, right, that somebody can get a hit without hitting their increasingly low attention span that wants more dopaminergic hits per minute, then they are more likely to engage in it. And really all they're doing is they're a mimetic processing machine in that moment that's saying, does this meme fit with or not fit with my existing meme complex? If not, reject. If so, accept and propagate.
Because of also the discomfort. There's an intense discomfort when things disagree with those beliefs that we hold in our identity. That ego construct inside of us, that is like basically getting a paper cut. Every time we see something that disagrees, it's getting an ego paper cut. Every time we see anything that disagrees with something we believe, because we're so attached and we've assumed that as part of our identity. So we don't want that. We don't want paper cuts. But a nice little dopamine hit, a nice little, little bang of the neurochemical we love so much, we'll go for more of that. So of course,
So
of
that
course it
thing you
works.
just mentioned, right? This is not the highest angels of our nature. This is not the highest potential of being human. It's some of the lowest, right? That wants to be right whether we are or not, that is uncomfortable with uncertainty and wants artificial certainty, right? So as to feel secure. We can see through the history of the world, people were willing to kill and die for religions where they were sure that God's name was such and such. And most of those gods don't even exist anymore. Like nobody really cares about Thor or Apollo or whatever. And they were the kill and die over certainty for those types of things. And so we can see how powerful certainty as a driver is. And we can see how historically it almost always looks wrong. And so does everybody else's certainty that isn't on our side. And so those are things we want to overcome, not drive and make worse. In the same way that everybody has addictive tendencies, but to make a healthy society, you want to help people overcome addictive tendencies, not push on them and make them worse. And yet, if I'm a business and let's say I have a fiduciary responsibility to my shareholders to maximize profit, if I'm a public business, right? Then I maximize the value of my business by increasing the total addressable market and increasing the lifetime value per customer. And I increase the total addressable market by trying to make products or services that are relevant to everybody, to increasingly more people. And I increase the lifetime value of a customer by having them want to keep coming back to whatever the thing that I do is. And there's no way to do that better than addiction. And so the supply side motive benefits from addiction. The society, and this is where we understand that war makes GDP go up, right? Military spending makes GDP go up. Sick people spending a lot of money on medical care in pharma industry makes GDP go up. GDP is a very, very bad indicator for well-being because total amount of money flowing through an economy has a lot to do with things that are managing bad problems. So the problems actually make it go up. But the demand side does not have the coordination that the supply side has. Because you and me and all Google users aren't getting together and coordinating as effectively as Google is with itself. So even though we're the same, like the total amount of attention or money flowing from demand into supply is the same in aggregate, the demand is disaggregated and the supply is coordinated, right? So you have an asymmetric warfare. So then the supply side says, I can manufacture demand. This was where theory of markets started to break. This was one of the key places where theory of markets started to break. Because theory of markets was people want real shit that will improve the quality of their life. And they'll make rational decisions between the various products or services available. So the fact that people want something, they're willing to pay something for it, creates an evolutionary niche for others to try to create supply, and the best product or service at the best price will win. Well, obviously, all the behavioral econ stuff that shows we don't make rational choices, particularly when we have the ability to have emotionally manipulative advertising that's as effective as it is, that hacks status desires. If I don't have that thing, I'm not part of the trend, the in-group, or whatever. That now get to be AI optimized, split tested AI optimized, that mostly is a drive dissatisfaction to then give them a hit that they got something. But also the supply side started to recognize I can make people want shit they never wanted. And I can manufacture demand. And so manufactured demand now broke the idea that the market is actually a collective intelligence system of things that are actually meaningful to increase quality of people's lives. And the best manufactured demand is addiction, of course. And the supply side has much more ability to coordinate that motive. That's the AI in employment of it compared to the people who don't even know that there's a rivalrous game for their own attention happening.
And also there's the problem because listen, I mean, we're having this conversation about, Facebook Global and the challenges that it's actually perpetrating upon our society and the ills of it. But I still have an Instagram account and I put a lot of beautiful ideas and things and I reach a lot of people and I get dozens of messages every day. Thank you, Aubrey, for what you put out. This really means a lot to me. And so I'm in one level participating because that is the place. This has now become the medium by which I can express ideas that are helpful. So that it becomes this cost benefit analysis. I'm contributing to something that is overall detrimental to the society. But if I don't contribute, then I lose my ability to share my gift, which is actually contributing positively to society. So they have me in a bind, and they have many, many people in a bind in that way because of they've just gotten so much momentum, and there's really nothing that can compete with it.
That's so. When we developed antitrust law in the US and many countries were developing antitrust law to make sure that and monopoly laws. It was a pre-digital world, and we didn't have Metcalfe network type dynamics. And so those weren't factored into the way that we thought about it. Something only became a monopoly typically if they did some work to very actively, in criminal ways, suppress competition and then even get government support for how they did that thing. But in network dynamics, where you have a Metcalfe law type process, meaning that the value of the network is proportional to the number of people on it. So as more people join, it becomes more valuable. Then once you get above a certain escape velocity, it's more people are going to be joining that thing relative to any other thing, because as more people join it, it continues to become a stronger attractor. And so you end up getting monopolies that are not a government monopoly of the previous type, but it is nothing else is going to emerge. You have a power law distribution of within a domain, there's Amazon, and then there's every other marketplace, right? There's Facebook, and then there's all the other kind of social media. There's YouTube, and then there's all the other video channels. You end up getting that kind of power law distribution within those verticals. And so that is functionally a monopoly. It's a monopoly that is bigger than countries. Countries have a very hard time trying to regulate something like that because countries move very slow relative to the speed of corporations, especially once the countries have decayed as much as ours have. And the corporations have the money to keep paying for lobbying and lawyers that are very effective. And when it's this kind of thing and affecting public opinion in a way that would be critical to the basis of changing law itself, right? So it becomes obligate. Once it becomes large enough where if you choose not to participate with it, you're really not participating in society, it became an obligate thing. And so now we have to say, okay, that's very powerful. Is there a way that it is bound to the good of society? Or is it just unchecked power? And what would check that power? Anytime a new power comes, it's really powerful. We have to say, does it differentially serve some over others? Is it tending to the good of the whole? If it isn't, how do we check it? And that's a core question with all of the exponential technologies, is they make rapidly more power and much faster than any previous technology did that. And they are not being developed mostly for kind of comprehensive commons integrity as their basic